my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by for this latest episode of Good Trouble, the series where I engage in above-the-table conversations that I feel are necessary in our community in a spirit of education and compassion. To all the regular viewers of Good Trouble, thank you so much for continuing to engage. I really appreciate your feedback. And as you all know, many of my episodes arise from reacting to conversations, continuing conversations that I see in our community, in media, in entertainment, all over the place. And in this particular case, it does come from a couple of different areas and detecting a thread going along. So what does board gaming have to do with movies, have to do with the Atlanta Braves winning the World Series 2021? Congratulations. Thank you for defeating the hated Houston Astros, ya cheaters. What is the thread that is linking them for me and inspired me to pick up this piece? So the idea is that a lot of these things involve a measure of washing. And on a very basic level, what I mean by washing is when we're seeing a piece of entertainment and we want to engage, we want to just relax, we want to feel comfortable and free to have fun. So sometimes life happens and things interject that either diminish familiarity or introduce some kind of difficult thing, a historical sin or some cultural badness that we don't like. Our culture and our human minds have developed certain strategies for washing difficult things away and increasing our familiarity and our comfort within the particular thing. So I want to talk about that. I want to identify 3 strategies that the mind uses to kick up comfort and reduce discomfort with difficult things that might be appearing in our media. And I want to do so in the context of what I always do, or I try to do here on Shelf Stories. I want to talk about the practice, not the people. I don't want to assume worse intention of whoever is either producing the media that we're talking about or enjoying the media that we're talking about. So I don't want to say that, okay, anybody's bad, you're bad, or anything like that. This is an invitation to consider impacts that media might have on somebody, because we all have different experiences. We all come at things from different areas. We all have different historical memories. I'll talk a lot about historical memory throughout the video. So we all come from different places. And, if certain people are feeling certain things and certain discomfort and they're going, red line, let's talk about this. This is an invitation to get into that discussion. And I want to talk about the issue, the practice, and not stigmatize the people. In fact, invite the people who are interested to have a discussion. That is the whole project of Shelf Stories. Shelf Stories is all about the discussion and tuning down the heat, bringing out the light, and having these critical discussions of our media, and so that we can really foment and cultivate this truly multicultural space. That is my goal here on Shelf Stories. If you are down with that project, please, the best you can do to support is like the video, subscribe to the channel, spread the word, share it out on your personal social medias, tell your friends, discuss the issues at cons, all that good stuff. I'm not going to monetize Shelf Stories. The more and more I go down, making videos, the more I really see that I want to do as much as possible to center the ideas and center the practices. It's harder to do when there's an ad jutting into the right in the middle of a discourse or something like that. So I'm not going to monetize. So the best way that you can show your support is spreading the word of Shelf Stories, and especially my attempts to make good trouble for people who might be engaged in some kind of practice, to rethink it, but good, constructive, and healthy as much as I can. So the first one I'm going to talk about is this concept called greenwashing. I'm going to talk about this one first is because these were recent conversations off of podcasts and forum blogs and all this kind of stuff where this just happened. So it's very fresh in the mind. So the concept, I thought it meant something else, but I think Dan Thoreau, the Space Biff, who's a friend of mine, appeared in the show, is using it in a certain way. And he employed it in a blog that came out a couple of months ago in which he was reviewing Australia. Yes, Australia. It is a game from Martin Wallace, a Euro-style game in which the players play a colonialist instead of the indigenous peoples who are already there and who the colonialists displaced in real history. It is a fantasy where we are now invading into Cthulhu monster land. So the Australia has been taken over by these Cthulhu monsters who destroyed all the indigenous folks, and then the world is responding and going to go into Australia and clean the world of Cthulhu monsters. Okay, so Dan calls this greenwashing because this wasn't kind of a benign artistic choice. It wasn't like, oh, I want to make a Cthulhu game where I'm like invading and killing Cthulhu monsters. Those games are all over the place. I have two of them right here. They've been there the whole time. Eldritch Horror, or one of them with many, many expansions and boards and stuff. I love Eldritch Horror. And I will slay some Cthulhu monsters along with anybody else. But there is a problem that arises when you put the Cthulhu monsters in a historical setting. In this particular case, Australia. So I'll quote Dan directly. Greenwashing is a process by which historical figures are cast as literal aliens in order to expunge any guilt the player may have felt upon killing them. So it's not an artistic choice. It's not an empty artistic choice. It's not like, okay, I have this vision in my head and I want to produce the art of it. I mean, it is, but it's appropriating from a real historical context that people remember. You know, anybody who has a historical memory or, that's what Shelf Stories is all about. I have my history chats and I'm always talking about history, colonialism. And the history of colonialism is these ugly processes. And for whatever reason, I'm not here to judge, but I'm just calling out the facts. Gamers just love to reenact that stuff. They love to be in the space of the colonizer, moving in and taking over land, but they don't want to feel guilty about it. What I like to say is we like to have our cake and eat it too. We want to have the cake of not just being conqueror in general, because this could have been in space or wherever it was, or relay, or however you pronounce that. It could have been anywhere, but is in history. And for whatever reason, we like to, enact historical people. But we don't want to do it in a way that causes issues. So then we're having the cake of being an historical figure, but eating away any guilt that we felt of what those historical figures did. And so that sounds like, oh my God, the author is being so, unreasonable, like I'm impugning bad intent or whatever it is. That's not about that at all. I mean, it's just like a mental process that we go forward. And I'm going off of an interview that appeared on Ludology, where Martin Wallace talks about this very game and gives his explanation for where the game came from. So I'm reproducing this piece of audio with the kind permission of Gil Hova from Ludology. This is Martin Wallace explaining his process of making Australia.
Welcome to Ludology, a podcast about the why of gaming.
A lot of my games have been influenced by the places that I visited. So I wanted to do a game about Australia, but the colonization of Australia, the real colonization of Australia, is horribly brutal, very much like the colonization of America. And it's like, nobody's going to play that. So you replace the indigenous people with monsters, then you can do it. This mixing of the real world with the fantasy allows you to deal with things that you couldn't do in a straightforward historical game.
You feel that people, when they played Australia, they didn't really map the monsters, the zombies, to the indigenous people. They felt that there was like a separation there.
Some do, some don't.
Problem. Not a problem. I see a problem. And I'm not the only one. Was not a part of the original Kickstarter pledge, but there was someone who did speak up. How did Martin Wallace respond to them?
I think when we first ran the Kickstarter, I think there was somebody kicking off complaining that there wasn't enough representation of the indigenous peoples. We hadn't ignored them. We had a couple of character cards in there to represent them.
All right, so I'm going to show a little bit of charity here. I do a podcast. I've done one for years. I get how conversation is flowing and the correct words aren't often chosen. So that's fine. So I'm not going to, launch the bombs at this one. But I think it's very telling that, we're talking about kicking about and complaining when it comes to people who are expressing displeasure with the idea. So getting back to this idea of like some do, some don't, some like it, some don't, some are offended, some are not. That's part of art, right? I mean, and so if it was just like a non-historicized piece of art, it's like, okay, we're going to figure it out. Let the, discussion happen, along whatever lines. But when we're talking about history and when we're talking about people's memories of history, not everybody's going to have the same memories. They're not going to recall the history the same way as people. So to me, when we're talking about the some do, some don't, as opposed to, flattening it, turning it into a fence and dismissing the side that you're not on, I think the tie in this case should go to folks with a deeper historical memory. I think that we're healthier as a culture. We treat each other better, a multicultural society, when we remember our history. And in this particular case, this greenwashing is actually folded into a larger project, which Dan also talks about later in the same blog, where he's quoting another scholar talking about, quote, the Great Australian Silence. It is a structural matter, a view from a window which has been carefully placed to exclude a whole quadrant of the landscape. What may well have begun as simple forgetting of other possible views turned into habit, and over time into something like a cult of forgetfulness practiced at a national scale. Cult is a strong word, but I think what this is getting at is this persistent forgetting of history. For what? For comfort. This persistent misrepresentation of peoples to unlock and give permission for killing, right? And this happened. And why do I care about this? I'm not Australian, but I'm American. And I remember the American conquest. Matter of fact, that was mentioned in the very piece where Martin Wallace links the American and the Australian colonization processes. They're one-to-one. And I'm comfortable linking them because they come from the same place, the same crown, the same culture, doing the same things to indigenous peoples around the world. So there's a natural resonance there. And so when we talk about reframing peoples, it's a multi-step process. It's a multi-step process that allows and justifies killing. So in the American context, which I know a little bit better, we have when the European conquerors first came, they encountered the Taínos and the Caribs. Later on, the meeting other peoples, meeting the Aztecs, meeting the Iroquois and Seminoles and Cherokee and all the different tribes of native peoples that were around. They got reduced to merciless Indian savages. Wasn't just a conquistador thing. It is written into the very American Declaration of Independence, merciless Indian savages. Unlocks the ability to kill. Its own kind of washing. And so when we're in gaming and we want to kind of enter that space from the perspective of the colonizer, then we need to do our own brand of washing, which is we might be uncomfortable with merciless Indian savages in today's world, but in today's world, what that becomes is greenwashing. It's too close. For anyone who has an historical memory, it aligns too closely with stuff that happened in the past, and it's not comfortable. It causes harm for people who remember and who have emotional resonance and solidarity with not only what happened in the past, but what's happening today. There's a lot of indigenous folks that are alive today. I'll have more to say about that in just a second. So that is greenwashing. Let's move on to whitewashing. I want to clarify something that I alluded to in the intro, but I wanted to make a little bit more clear here. Washing doesn't only address difficult stuff, killing and all the terrible things that maybe we do in a game or watch in a movie or different kind of media. Yes, washing is definitely, we wash away, difficult things. Washing also promotes a sense of comfort. It could be like a benign thing or something that we're, anything that we enjoy that has no problems at all, but we wash in order to kick up a sense of comfort. It's all about comfort, because we're talking about entertainment here. And anyone who knows, anyone who's aware of what happens when we enter an entertainment space, we want to put our critical thinking down just a little bit. Put the challenge of having to think through the day's problems aside and just let go, so to speak, and be in the entertainment. And so anything that increases comfort is going to be welcomed by the consumer and pursued by the maker. So there is very little that promotes comfort better than familiarity. And I want to be really careful here when it comes to a discussion about familiarity here and the concept of whitewashing, because it's so easy to say, okay, creators whitewash because consumers prefer white things. So white consumers, or who has the money, right? We have, POC all over the world that kind of outnumber white people. We go kind of talk about, just raw demographics, but who has the money, who has the purchasing power? It's mostly white folks. And so I do not want to say that anybody who makes a product is racist and anybody who enjoys a whitewash product, they're also racist. That is not what I'm saying at all. What I want to talk about is race, but not in the concept of racism. I want to talk about it in psychological terms. And I talked about this a while ago in a video called The Science of Human Racial Bias. One of my favorite videos that I've made, because I really dug into the science of this. And I want to bring it back here because it's about bias. It's about how our minds respond to familiar things, how we are more reassured when we see familiar things. And one of those familiar things that we can see is skin color. It's just a biological reality, especially in entertainment, because we're putting our critical minds down and, just going with comfortable things. And very often we default to the thing that makes us feel more comfortable, the familiar thing. And so whitewashing is taking pieces of entertainment that normally aren't white and whiteifying them. So if you have a film or any kind of media that is in a different place, that has a lot of, different types of people, black, brown, red, or whatever it is, you lighten up the skin, you make it seem a little bit more, everything is lighter. Even if you're keeping the actual ethnicities, you're whitening up, you're lightening up. There's a colorism thing that happens so that people who have the purchasing power, which is, as I said before, tends to be a little bit whiter, will enjoy the thing more. We had this happen when it came to the In the Heights movie. Recently, I've been thinking about this. It's a big Puerto Rican thing. My boy Lin-Manuel Miranda repping, taking his first play that was released many years ago, and turning it into a movie that came out very recently. And the cast of the movie, the main cast of the movie, most of the main cast of the movie, there was one character that was darker skinned, but they weren't even kind of part of the movie. The main characters were all light skinned, and a lot of the back representation was light skinned as well. That became a problem because the movie is called In the Heights, in Washington Heights. And, this is one of those things. Another one, tie goes to the people with the historical memory. In this particular case, tie goes to the people with the neighborhood memory. Washington Heights, historically and today, has been a Afro-Latino community. And you'll see way more darker skin than you will light skin. But magically, when we get to the realm of entertainment, making people feel comfortable, we have this instinct to whitewash. Creators have the instinct to whitewash, and consumers are depending on the market that you're aiming for. If you're aiming for a more light-skinned market, then we're going to whitewash that out and present a lighter product, a more familiar product. Again, that is saying that is not racist. It is biased, and I want to be able to talk about bias outside of racism in this context, as I'm saying over and over again. So whitewashing became relevant in board gaming discussions very recently with the game Paleo, which I own it. It's right there. I just put it in the shot. Realized it was out of the shot. I'm going to talk about you now, Paleo. This is a cooperative game that we released last year and won a Spiel des Jahres. So we're talking about a significant product that a lot of people know about. I want to thank the gang at Shut Up and Sit Down. Quinn and everybody has done a really good job on their show, on their podcast, these different places of highlighting a lot of this colonialist stuff with a much wider audience than I'm currently reaching right now. So thank you very much for continuing those conversations and giving me an education. I didn't quite realize what was happening until they broke it down. It was very helpful. So Paleo takes place in the Paleolithic era, which is really long, millions of years. In a span of human history, we get agriculture thousands of years ago, 10, 8, 7,000 years ago, depending on how the archaeologists date these things. And so the Paleo is definitely taking place, before then, Paleolithic. And we don't have any scientific evidence that the light skin genes, right there, you could look them up, that they were evolved in the Paleolithic time period. All of our evidence suggests, because a lot of the first humans came from Africa and kind of southern locales, that they were darker skinned. We actually have evidence that the skin for lighter eye color evolved. So seeing a darker skinned person with a lighter with a blue eye color or something else, that might have been interesting, and that might have been relative to the science that we know now, more historically accurate than what Paleo portrayed. Why did Paleo do what it did? Because they're a bunch of racists. I followed some of the discussion at BGG, and some people go there, and it's like it doesn't have to go there. Once again, as difficult as it is, we have to either try to talk about race, but not in terms of racism, but in terms of psychological bias. Familiar seeks comfort in familiar. And if we're talking about a community that is mostly white, and that's where the money is, a lot of the money is, that's where the market is, the purchasing power is, then, the product was made to serve that market and appeal in terms of familiarity. That's fine. I mean, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that at that level, and that we're not stuck there. We can alter these things. We can change these things so that reflect new markets and to reflect our values. From my personal perspective, I think I see a huge value in leaning towards representation in games for the exact reason we're talking about, more familiarity. We can use games as a way to educate people get people familiar with folks from different races and different cultures and different backgrounds and different skin colors, and not in a way that's all Pollyanna-ish, that actually undoes some of the whitewashing that has occurred in history. We're actually becoming more historically accurate. Tie goes to greater historical memory. And if we go by the historical memory, then, we can have more representation in the games. And with more representation comes more familiarity. It becomes easier and easier for us to understand one another and get along. Is that too big to expect from gaming culture? Well, how about we give better historical representation a chance in our games and find out. So now we're going to get to my final example of washing, which has to do with sports. I'm a big sports fan, baseball fan, American baseball. Just finished watching the World Series, which was won by the Atlanta Braves. And so many, many opportunities for me to enjoy what I was watching, but also cringe. Why am I cringing? Because of a practice in which the Braves fans engage. And on and off, the organization encourages this practice. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it is called the chop. There you go. In terms of its origin, there's different stories about it. So I think accepted version is that Deion Sanders, the football slash baseball player back in the early 90s, brought it from the Florida Seminole program, college, to the Braves. And that I remember. I remember being a Yankee fan, watching those high-level World Series games in the early 90s and seeing the chop all over the place. Since then, it has disseminated, at least in America that I know, among the Kansas City Chiefs football team, and other sports franchises that are linked with some kind of native name or image. So at a very surface level, it is a caricature. Whether we agree or disagree, whether we think it's caricature, it's fine, or whether we have a big problem with the caricature, it is a caricature of native practices. So on my side, I think it's just ridiculous and offensive and reductive and all these kind of things. It is very, I don't know, just degrading for folks, and seeing white folks, to say what it is, engage in that practice without having any historical memory or context for where some of those practices come from, it makes me sad and hurt. And it's a little ridiculous. And it happens a lot. Here's another example, very, very recent, that I saw on the interwebs, of a teacher in California teaching the mathematical concept of SOHCAHTOA.
Hey, SOHCAHTOA, 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 SOHCAHTOA,
Really? I was a teacher, so I feel the instinct to want to make SOHCAHTOA memorable, right? It's a abstract acronym. It's referencing trigonometry. I remembered it from when I was a kid, but ask you to remember it now, and I have no freaking clue. I could never be able to tell you what SOHCAHTOA means. So they're trying. The teacher is trying to put out something that makes it memorable for the kids, playing on the fact that it sounds vaguely like a word that would come from a Native American language. It's not. It's just a caricature. It's a stereotype. I think it's really offensive and wrong. And apparently there has been discipline laid out for the teacher. So, there you go. Point being, these aren't different. Maybe someone will say, well, this is different than this. And blah, blah. To me, they're not different at all. It's all representations and reinstantiations of caricatures that demean people that are still alive today, 500 plus tribes strong, all around the Americas in terms of Native Americans, and around the world, the different indigenous peoples around the world. So if we talk about this, the chop, let's just go back to the chop, right? And we talk about it still on the level of offensive, right? Is this offensive or is it not? We're going to get trapped in a hole. And I really want to have a different conversation than whether it's offensive or not. What I would like to do is bring back the washing concept and talk about a strategy that a lot of people use to be able to say that something like the chop is not offensive. I would like to call it token washing. Find someone from the community who agrees with the concept that this isn't all bad and it's fine, and let people do it. Let people do what they want. Find someone from that community that says it's fine, and just throw it in there. Throw it in the face of anybody who disagrees and says they think it's fine, so you shouldn't think that it's fine as well. It plays in a level of feelings. It regards identity as kind of static, as if, one identity can cover one ideology, one belief speaks for the whole group. So if I find somebody from the group that, agrees with it, then that speaks for everybody. And let's just leave it alone. Does not work, but it is definitely a strategy that folks use. Folks as high as the commissioner of baseball himself, Rob Manfred. So, talking about the chop, we've been talking about it for years. As long as it has been a thing in the early 90s, there were protest movements saying, please stop this. This is offensive and stereotypical. They have not gotten the reach that has gotten now because of Black Lives Matter and awakened interest in social justice, but it's been there the whole time. So Rob Manfred has had plenty of opportunity to kind of think about this. And this is what he said. It is important to understand we have 30 markets around the country. They're not all the same. The Braves have done a phenomenal job with the Native American community. Manfred said, going on, that the Native American community in the Atlanta region is wholly supportive of the Braves program, including the CHOP. For me, that's the end of the story. So as soon as I read this phrase, Native American community, done a phenomenal job of whatever it is. What are they talking about? The National Council of Indian Affairs has come out against the CHOP, like a pretty big organization. Whatever you think of it, it is a player in that amongst those communities. So what am I supposed to think? So going to the Atlanta Braves website, they have partnered in this particular case with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. So let me read a quote for context from the ECBI Principal Chief, Richard Sneed. Quote, "I'm not offended by somebody waving their arm at a sports game. I'm just not. Somebody is, that's their prerogative, that's their right, they can be offended. There's just so much happening. And the frustrating part for me as a tribal leader is when the only issue that seems to be discussed is how offended are you by the CHOP and should the Braves change their name? Really, it's the least of our problems." Guess that's what I'm saying. And then with reference to the CHOP itself and the name of the Atlanta Braves, they're an affirmation of the honor and strength and courage and the warrior spirit of Native peoples. And so I want to be really careful once again, because I did use the word token, which could be a derogatory term. And I don't want to say that this person is, just walking into a situation being a sucker. I'm very sure that Mr. Sneed has done a lot of deep thinking about this, talked to different people about it, weighs the pros and cons of partnering with somebody in the middle of controversy and saying, okay, this controversy isn't so serious. Let's have a partnership that may confer some material benefits, may confer visibility. I'm a big fan of visibility when it comes to, articulating problems and all that kind of thing. So that's fine. I'm not accusing, anybody of anything. And also, I affirm the right of different people to have different opinions. I mean, like anybody, Native American tribes, 500 plus here in America, are not a monolith. Free to disagree. This is offensive. This is not. I like the CHOP. I don't like the CHOP. Let them do it. They don't let them do it. Go back and forth, and we can have those discussions on a feelings end and on a cultural end. Where I have the difficulty is where people use the idea that one tribe says so, and therefore no other tribe should have anything to say. Don't ruin my comfort. Steamrolling historical memory. Once again, I'll say it one more time. I truly feel that when it comes to these things, it's not about feelings. It's about the tie going to historical memory. When we talk about the warrior spirit of the Native people being evoked by the CHOP, are we really talking about that? Or are we re-evoking the merciless Indian savage? That phrase, once again, appearing in our founding documents, Declaration of Independence, that phrase, unlocking, being part of the unlocking of genocide, wiping out of Native peoples from the very first moment that the colonizers came here. And there's a more specific historical referent here. We're talking a series of regulations called the Civilization Regulations that happened between the 1880s and the 1930s. That's when a lot of our sports teams were founded. It's when a lot of colleges were founded in their sports programs. So on the one hand, you had these civilization regulations that only apply to Native Americans that made it illegal for them to speak their language, celebrate their culture, engage in their religious practices. Basically, everything Native is bad. Civilize yourself, which means whiteify yourself, which means Christianize yourself. This is all in the historical record. You'll see just like people just saying blankly, these people need to be Christianized. And so they can't practice their traditions at all. At the same time, what was happening was you had colleges and sports teams and everything appropriating stereotypes of Native practices and engaging in them during their play, or having mascots. We call about the mascotization of Native American traditions. So you have largely white folks that are re-engaging in stereotypes of the culture at the same time as the real people are barred legally from practicing their culture. So you have the dissemination of stereotypes that have come down to this day in the face of the oppression of Native peoples, which in many ways, because we repealed the civilization regulation in the 1930s, thank goodness, in a way their oppression continues today. And as I've said about stereotypes before, the more you allow stereotypes to pervade in a culture, the harder it becomes for the real people to make their voice heard. Because, you know, when you're talking to people in power, if they already have anchored ideas that are ridiculous or that are evoking violence, in the case of, you know, the merciless Indian savage, when those stereotypical ideas are already there, it becomes that much harder to, you know, represent whatever the real concerns are. And there are a lot of real concerns. We're talking very, very current, because a lot of Native American communities are involved in climate work. You know, protesting pipelines that are, you know, running through their lands, and water conservation, the stuff that we're not talking about at all enough in terms of the climate crisis. You would be really, really surprised to hear that Native American communities are at the forefront of talking about this stuff, which is a very future focused thing. I'll talk about the historical memory a lot. Why do I give it weight? Because it pays forward in the future. Understanding where we came from helps us understand what's happening and where we're going. And so what does this discussion have to do with board gaming? I mean, maybe you don't remember the controversy that arose around this game, Manitoba, that happened a couple of years ago. But it was some Euro game that wanted to center a Native American tribal experience, but just threw in stereotypes and didn't do enough research to be, really resonant. Just we don't do a good job at all of representing Native American communities in an accurate, respectful, celebratory way. That's just across the blanket problem that this video is going to trying to work on solving. Another aspect, though, is this idea of token washing, where any of these games, and I've encountered this, talking about Puerto Rico, my first Good Trouble video was about Puerto Rico and other colonialist games. And having the counter argument of, I asked my Puerto Rican friends and they don't have any problem with it. Or here's a Puerto Rican that's posting over here, they don't have a problem with it, so why do you have a problem with it? Taking one voice, and again, it's not about the voice. They could have all the disagreement in the world, but the idea that the fans of the thing that take that voice and just throw it out there and say they don't have a problem, therefore no one should have a problem. That's token washing. And voices we don't need that. Right? I reject that framework. I think that, if some people have a problem and if some people don't have a problem, we can engage in that argument. But then if we're talking about these historical games or you're evoking historical and cultural realities, then to me, the tie goes to not just the people who have the power, not just the token or whatever thing that we're using to justify our comfort. The tie should go to those with more historical memory. So there's my discussion of washing. We got greenwashing, we got whitewashing, we got token washing, we got lots and lots of washing. I have tried to do my very best to focus on practices, not people, not attack people, not say you're terrible for liking this thing. Are you terrible for liking the chop? Absolutely not. Are you terrible for liking, Puerto Rico and all these colonialist games? Absolutely not. It is my way of trying to isolate the practice and invite folks to a critical think about it. It is difficult because there are people who are attached to this stuff, and I'm wading in. And I am on a pretty unequivocal at this point that there's certain practices that I just think have terrible resonance because of the history behind it and because I happen to be a historically minded person, but I'm open to dialogue about practices, not people. Please comment here in the YouTube show, wherever else this video gets posted. Like I said in the beginning, every like and subscription helps. Every share of this video helps. That is the best way that you can support what I'm doing here on Shelf Stories. So if you can change your mind, you can change the world, people. Until next time, later, everybody.